Hello, welcome everybody for my presentation about using AI in ethically responsible ways that doesn't infringe on copyright of living artists. And I want to talk about two major topics here in this presentation. For one, about a research project that works to use ethical approaches to AI visualization in Shakespeare adaptation. So the main goal of this project is to create innovative visual adaptations of Shakespeare plays and animation supported by AI production methods. And I will explain more about this later in the presentation. Secondly, I will talk about using AI methods to apply stylization to animation that is done in the rough and then create a look that resembles Chinese painting. So this is all carried out based on the 3-minute film, The Stork Tower, which we devised based on this classical Chinese poem. First, let's talk about the usage of AI as prompts to AI video animation. So this is the original poem, which is a very famous classical original Chinese poem. And you can see the prompts we used first to instigate some AI results there on the right. So that is basically text to image. And you can see some of the video here. What we didn't like about this video is, for one, it was drawing from available sources, means possibly copyrighted material elsewhere. And that is not something we A, wanted to use. B, we were also not happy about it, like in terms of its look. So we took it to the next level and took some AI prompts, which were like hopefully more closely describing what we were looking for. And then the results began to change. We also included a method here, which is actually using input from Aloras, which is actually a library, a smaller library in the AI tool Stable Diffusion that allows us to determine the outcomes more closely, yet still we were not arriving at the results we were looking for. So you can see how complex here this process actually is. And then you can also see here how text input was combined with images. But using this combined method, we were still not arriving at a look we were looking for. First of all, we wanted to have a much more stylized Chinese painting look, and also AI produces these results, which always produces multiple outcomes and that are really not exactly what we wanted. So again, we went into modifying our prompts and also included other libraries. We created a library which was mainly based on public domain available images of Chinese paintings. So these images are old enough so that they are not infringing on existing copyright. And then the outcomes became much closer to what we were looking for, as you can see here. And you can see a animated version of this one. This is what AI gave us based on the prompts. And if you look at it, there are many problems here because obviously this is just an ongoing metamorphosis with only pause without any pause or comma, if you will. So the pacing is completely uneven and the eye can never rest, which we really want for a film to do so that the viewer can more immerse into the environments. And so that was not a satisfying result. So where did we go from there? So from here onwards, we used a method of hybrids that combined traditional animation, even traditional digital tools like Adobe After Effects or Adobe Photoshop, to break down the whole movie into layers and then create manipulations on these layers, which basically brought us closer to what we were looking for. And you can just see some attempts here. that we were looking actually for certain modifications and then experiments and tryouts, just to first of all take away this permanently changing of settings and landscapes, but also to introduce more clarity to certain elements. And you can really see here there is actually some line animation which we use as background or like as backdrop for our actually AI stylization. So this was all animated traditionally first, and some in-betweening was done by AI, stylization was done by AI, but it was not entirely created by AI. So you can see this crane here that is moving now, that is actually being added to as an element that is not actually created by AI, but it is a hybrid version that also introduces traditional methods. And you can see this in different iterations here, different design iterations. So similar, it was the case with our attempts to go for a stylization in our backgrounds. Here's another scene from the movie. And what you can see on the bottom right is way too photorealistic. And we wanted to go to a much more stylized form of animation. So, and you can see here, one of the first attempts was to use live action reference to animate a figure that should be combined into the scene. But what ultimately resulted here was not really what we wanted. So way too photorealistic had nothing to do with the look of a Chinese painting we wanted to achieve. So if you look at the whole movie here, is too far away from this look of very reduced and stylized Chinese painting we wanted to actually achieve. And it's way too photorealistic, so that's not what we were looking for. So now you can see a different approach. So now we went away from this photorealistic, photo-based live action captured input, but we used some drawing. It produced any uneven results, but it brought us more closely to some stylization here. And you can see what these results were, but still there was a discrepancy here between the two photorealistic movement of a character in the middle of a frame, and then also the discrepancy between the stylization of a pagoda on the right and the trees on the left. So here is a final result which we achieved by reworking it again and actually creating the figure in the middle mainly by using traditional animation and by redrawing the tree on the left so that now all the elements go together and we result in a much more stylized look. So that is much closer to what we want to do in terms of stylization. And it shows that by just using AI alone, we were not able to achieve exactly the look we were looking for. And of course, we are working on perfecting these methods further. So in a different scene, you have a similar problem. So like here we have an animation of a boat on the river where we basically what we did is we always used certain scenes from the animation which we wanted to extend, and then we used the AI tools to also generate animation, but that was never ever perfect. So we had to also, you can see it better here. So there is a shadow here, or this wave crest is moving in the wrong direction. The character in the front is not looking good. And so what we did is we broke everything down into layers and then perfected the animation by itself by combining different image sources. And again, we went back to traditional digital imaging tools to do this. And then we recombined everything back into the animation as a whole, as you can see here. So now the crest of a wave is moving in the right direction, and we removed the figure that was not working in the front. In a similar way, we had to conceptualize a scene there. A woman was walking down the stairs in front of a Chinese temple. And here we used, again, as input for AI for image to image renderings, we use these drawings, these more stylized drawings of a female character. You can see an example of exact photo reference here. Then there is a more stylized look applied to it. And then finally, there is a look which is much more stylized, but not quite exactly where we want it to go, but much closer already. Here you can see then in summary again. So, and this is how it played out in the final video. Still, it was not perfect because we had some elements here overlapping, which we wanted to remove. So as you can see here, we went back to Photoshop to actually Photoshop's AI removal tool, a built-in AI removal tool in Photoshop to basically create an open space here so that this action of the lady walking down the stairs here could read more clearly. And we had a similar problems with the scene of two birds fighting. Uh, we had a similar problem. There actually AI didn't first give us the results we wanted. So you can look here at some AI produced animation, and what you see here is that actually the birds are moving in and out of the central space we wanted them to be situated in here, and also the fighting was not really convincing. So what did we do? We went back to again take out the birds as a separate layer and use them to try out in separate ways, like as a separate layer in AI first. You can see the results here, right? However, it just didn't quite work out and it didn't quite produce the results we wanted. So what we finally did is we went back to a approach that used keyframes which were traditionally drawn. And then these were rendered into the style we wanted, as you can see here, turning line drawings into drawings which more resemble a Chinese painting style. And you can see more examples here, more examples here. And here is actually some animation in flight. Another example, more convincing rendering of a bird attacking. Different ones here. More of the examples. I will not talk about everything here, just show some. So this was all hand drawn and then basically in between partially in AI. And then these were looped to be inserted into the scene, manually animated the position of a bird attacks, and then you can see some final results here. So this is how it looked like all put together in different stylization variations. So the stylization again was done using AI, but what we came up with was finally this look, which kind of firmly kept the birds in check in the place where they were situated to be. That was our plan in the first place. And they were in the style of Chinese painting, which we were actually looking for. So here is the final movie. You can see it again. So the birds are firmly in the stage where they're supposed to be, and the animation looks more convincing. So another scene had a similar problem again. There things were just moving too fast, and then we wanted to extend the time which was spent on the guy in the boat here and make it a more serene scene. So you can see here things are moving way too fast, but now this is already slowed down and we focused on the guy in the middle and then added elements on a separate layer here. These leaves animated, we added them using animation in Maya. And we also manipulated the guy himself and metamorphosis into another scene on separate layers to make this more convincing. So here's another iteration of a scene. And you can see it morphs there into the next scene. And then all of these efforts combined, we came up with a final version, which I will play for you now. And what I want to say in conclusion on these methods which are being used here is that AI alone could not really solve our problems, at least not at this stage. So we had to go back and also use additional hand-drawn animation, additional digital manipulation using traditional tools to achieve a look which we finally wanted. So what you see now is still work in progress, but it's already a version which is much closer to what they want to go for as a final product. It is something where we're not sure if it really can qualify as an artistic project as its own, because like there's still some use of large-scale libraries here. So that is something we're just kind of like coming to terms with ourselves. But it certainly can be used as a technical demonstration within conferences how hybrid use of methods between AI and traditional digital imaging tools, inclusive of traditional animation, can lead to more artistically convincing results. So you can see here that actually there is way less hectic movement. The transitions are more smooth and gradual. These birds fighting are firmly in place, as I had described before. This scene is now very serene. It is held for quite a while. We have had perfect control about the leaves by just keeping them firmly in touch. This is the boat that is moving through the image from left to right. And then we have a transition to a bird, which was also first used, kind of like created using photo reference, but we finally found this bird had to be animated by hand to be more convincing. So we did that, and it now looks more of a piece with the rest of the surroundings and the film as a whole. And the final transition then goes on or it's actually not the final transition, but the next to final transition here, we see this guy in front of a temple, which is much more stylized in Chinese painting style. And finally, then there will be a transition moving ahead to this image of a woman walking down the steps of a Chinese temple or a Chinese village here. You can see that here. And with all the removals we did it using digital imaging tools, and then it will finally transition into a final image, and that concludes the film. So the film has changed from this hectic permanent movement into a more serene piece, which is more evenly paced and allows the visitor or the viewer to indulge into the scenery much more. So now let's go on to part two, which is about recreating the work of classical Shakespeare illustrators for animation. So the idea here was to really create animations that are done in the style of famous classic Shakespeare illustrators. And what is really the main idea here is to draw from work which is actually in the public domain. So we're not infringing on any existing copyright. And the first artist we are choosing here, and we are just in the first exploration stages of our research, is trying to animate some of the images by John Gilbert, who was a famous Shakespeare illustrator who created hundreds of Shakespeare illustrations in the 19th century. And here you can see his typical style with some illustrations from Macbeth. So he's very dominantly using cross-hatching as a stylistic element. And what we did first is to create a training library again using LoRa's for stable diffusion, which again is a device that allows to work with a much smaller library of illustration data files for stylization purposes in AI. And that, of course, enabled us to just take only 50 illustrations or so to be able to try to approximate the stylistic traits of his famous illustrator. And the first tryouts were actually done on the basis of static images. There you can see on the top, you can see what AI created, and the bottom is an original Gilbert illustration. And it worked fairly well for static images so that AI could understand how to create new images using this specific style. But as you will see soon, things become way more tricky when it comes to actual animated or moving images. So here are some examples of what we did using an illustration of Gilbert. And then what AI very often does, it relies on photographic imagery, and it has problems to deal with more abstract images. So the most convincing result we got from this method was maybe this one here. But here's still the problem that at the end of the animation, the character here to the left becomes too much resembling a photography that it could be used for our purposes. And here it's even more extreme, so that is really not working at all. And again, here, this is not very convincing compared to the one we saw before. So here's a summary of it all. So we also use the style that we kind of like were thinking about using cross-hatching as information to stylize, again, photographic imagery. But again, we were not getting the results we wanted to, particularly because this particular stylistic trait was referring back to the style of manga images, which we didn't want at all. So, what is always a challenge with AI is that AI is much better with photorealistic imagery. So we try to use a trick to convert our original illustration first back into a more photorealistic images or more photorealistic image as AI models, particularly large language models, are predominantly trained on real life video footage rather than frame by frame animations. Also, in the long run, we want to avoid the use of large language models as much as possible to get away from any notion of using work that is not in the public domain. So this all has to be seen as work in progress and not as our final results. So, so we used a basic style conversion tool in Stable Diffusion and replied a realistic photo large library model combined with control large language model combined with control net. So which is a way to more closely resemble what we were looking for. Um, then Yuma was used a basic image to video AI generation tool to create simple animations. Um, I think this is an approach we don't really want to follow through in the end because it's still too close to photorealistic imagery. We want to really go to a more stylized look, you know. But you can see what happened here is, as was described before, at the end of this animation, this woman grows an unnaturally long neck, and that remains, of course, in the stylized version as well. And here, going into the fully stylized version, it also has shortcomings that, of course, this anomaly remains. And also, the look of stylization we are going for is not what we really want because we want to have also stylistically more diverse characters that are really being able to go not through photo um, uh, reference, but to really make our illustration come to life as it is and keeping the animation style there or the illustration style there exactly the same as it is. So these are just shown for reference here. Um, there is always, as you can see here, a very complex method involved that also requires a balance between achieving realism and avoiding unnatural distortions when using AI. But again, what is still lacking in these experiments, and this is still what we were working on, is to go directly to use directly stylized images, which are not relying on photographic imagery. So here our first attempts to do this, to first create some idea of the animation in rough drawings, then to extend it in AI and use it as a basis for animating the illustration. However, this still causes some challenges here because, again, we were not yet able to avoid using photos. And as you can see here, the final result is way too close to photography. So the reason why we are showing much more work in progress animations here is that this project is just like a few months into its progress. And as you can see here, we're looking for some direct motion capture based animation here that would then transfer this animation to the illustration. But again, uh, while we are able to keep the look of the original illustration is not really working too well in terms of the animation itself. You can see the final result isolated once again here. So, the hands don't match up and so on. There's still problems we were working on. And actually, ultimately, we really want to move away from these methods that really rely on photographic imagery. I think that is something that we rather not want to have. So here are some other attempts we tried to do using different methods, using a software tool which is being called Wiggle. And you can see the shortcomings here, the jittering hand, the hand is not fully understood because it's really a graphical stylization of a hand, and then it's not really working. You can see it here, right? So it's that area here is not really working. So that is something that is also using that live action reference. But again, it looks too three-dimensional, too realistic, not stylized enough, not what we're looking for, not what we're really aiming for as a goal. And our next goal will be to really find methods which are much more closely going back to keeping the stylistic traits of animation or illustration intact, and then still create animations that will keep stylization. Yeah, so this is a little bit closer, but far from a satisfying result at this moment. So, yeah, so maybe we won't continue with this VFI method here. And we will also try to find new imaginative ways to use AI to create animations that are more closely and authentically representing the stylization traits of the original illustrations. In conclusion, this research aimed to highlight the capabilities of AI in art generation, particularly in its ability to understand complex creative directions and refine visual outputs through a process of iterative feedback. Our goal is always to keep the priority or the primate of artistic vision leading technology to the desired results. To an extent, I think we already succeeded with the Chinese painting piece. The Shakespeare stylization, Shakespeare classical illustrators, is still in its very initial stages in both making sure that we're only drawing from public domain sources, but also in achieving the stylistic approximation we're really in for. So please see this as a work in progress. And thank you so much for listening to this talk. And it was a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much.